So what you can see on the bottom here, this black bar, it's going to show all the keystrokes I'm going to be doing, which hopefully will also be recorded, but in principle with these ones you can follow, right? Now if it worked for everybody and everybody sees something similar to this, then that's fine. If not, let me know. But in principle, if you start Visual Studio Code, you get this kind of general window, right? In the middle here, you will have your code editors. And on the left side here, that's what's called the activity bar. So here you have a bunch of different functionalities, which you can access with a mouse. So for example, if you click here on the top on the Explorer, you will find open editors, which currently are none. And for example, the directory that you opened, or that you opened Visual Studio Code in. So if we click here, we see, okay, we have a bunch of files, basically all the files for the seminar here. Below, you have a normal search functionality. So a lot of these features, they are just normal to any text editor, right? Nothing really surprising here. Something that's a bit more interesting maybe is version control, which you have here. Let me just check something quickly. Don't save. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So by default, you will just see changes here. So if you have edited any files, changes in the files are going to appear here on the left. So in principle, also, if you add extensions, you will see more features here on the activity sidebar. Now, you can use the mouse to access this, but we will use mainly shortcuts using the keyboard, which I will mention them. You have them printed. You don't need to memorize all of them in principle, but it's just a recommendation from my side, because every time you need to reach from the keyboard to the mouse, you will lose some time. So we can open this sidebar here by pressing Control B. So with Control B, you can show and hide it, just to access it quickly. Another note for this general setup here I would like to mention is on the bottom here, you can see the account. So you can log into Visual Studio Code, you can make an account either using GitHub or your Microsoft account, and then you can activate settings sync. So it's going to synchronize all your extensions, all your settings between different workstations. So for example, now you all have it on your laptops. If you want to have it on the ICIQ PC, just create an account and it's going to transfer everything immediately. That's, I think, good to know. Now, okay, this is the general layout. Now, if we want to open a file, we can, as I mentioned before, go to the Explorer here. But what is much faster, and I introduced this very early on now, is the quick open. So if you press Control P, as you hopefully saw on the screen, you're going to open this little search bar, which is, yeah, there's the Zoom notification, but it's still visible, I hope. So if you press Control P, you open this little search bar here, and it's going to show you some recently opened files, for example. And here now you can search for file names. And for example, let's type in Python, because one of the files inside our folder is called Python file. So, okay, if we just press Enter, it's going to open this file in the editor, and you have it there. This is faster than going through the Explorer, because you can imagine otherwise, if you have a very complex project with a lot of directories, you would need to navigate through the entire directory structure, whereas with this one, you can just search for the files. So, for example, we also have a bash file here, which we find immediately if we just press Control P and enter bash. Now, if we want to open this in another editor, instead of pressing Enter, what we can do is we can press to the right, and it's going to open it in another editor. Just a little. Press just to the right, the arrow to the right. but you can also just press enter, it's just going to do the same thing. Now, if usually you're working, or often I would say you work with multiple files at the same time. So you can switch between them with Control-Tab. So just for your navigation, you can circle through these files. Let's open one last file here, which we're going to need, which is a Jupyter notebook. So if I just start typing IP for the file extension, you will see it matches here actually Jupyter notebook on the top, and then some other matches. So this Python file here also contains the same letters, so it's also matching this, which generally is very useful. So it doesn't need to be an exact match. You can just type, for example, some of the letters you know, and it's going to give you everything that somewhat fits. Okay. Yeah. A few more notes for the general outline. What you see here on the side, on the right, I guess for you it's also on the right, is the minimap. So you see here a little outline of the code, which might be useful if you're working with bigger files, just for you to know. And one other thing I would like to mention now is if you press Control-J, it will open this panel here on the bottom, which also will provide you with some functionalities, such as the terminal. It's going to show you the errors in your code, if there are any. Some Jupyter functionalities, we will get back to that later on. So with Control-J, you can open and hide that. You can also do it with a mouse, but I don't even know where to look there. So, okay. This is the general outline. Now, if you're working on some code base, like some Python code or Bash scripts or whatever, you will be working inside the editor here. And I just want to show you a few ways how you can edit your file, let's say. So if you have your cursor somewhere here, for example, on line 7 right now, if you press Control-L, you're going to select the entire line, which is useful so you don't need to go all the way like manually to the side. For example, you just press Control-L and you select the whole line. With Control-X, you cut the line. And with Alt up and down, you can move the lines up and down. So if you want to, for example, quickly restructure some code you wrote, these are just a few, let's say, rather basic functionalities. Now, one thing you might need to do quite frequently is comment out code. So what you could do is you could memorize for all the programming languages which characters do I need to put to comment out a line. But Visual Studio also provides your shortcut, which is Control/. So with this, you can comment out individual lines. You can select more parts of your code and quickly comment them out or comment them in, instead of having to write it by hand.
And you can select multiple lines and then comment.
Exactly. And it's going to work the same way for any programming language if you have the setup there correctly. So you don't need to memorize which character you need there.
Then you have to have your extension right.
Yeah, so I think this would also work without an extension, but a lot of the other features that I will show you, for these you need the Python extension, for example, in our case now, for a lot of the features. Exactly. Now, yeah, let me check. Okay. Another thing you can do is if you press Control and up and down, it's going to move your editor window here around while you're staying in the same line. Control up and down, just for navigation. To move the view, but staying in the same line.
Okay, yeah.
So you're scrolling, moving the scroll bar to the right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Then, yeah, another way to navigate your code is by pressing Control-G for go to, and then you can type, for example, some line. If you know where you want to go, you can quickly go there instead of having to manually search it with a mouse. So these are in principle just very general editor functionalities, just to mention them, to get them kind of out of the way. Now, maybe you have seen already, if I press Control G, what opens again is this little search window on the top here. And this search window is very important because we're going to use that for everything, basically. So you see here now you have the search window and this colon right now, which means, okay, go to. If I actually remove this colon, you will see we're again at this kind of file browser, let's say, where you have the files. And yeah, you don't see it now on my screen, but I guess on your screen you will see it if you have it open here. You can, there's some text written, search files by name, or you can put other things here. So for example, if you put a greater symbol, you're not searching for files, but you're searching for commands within the editor. So, for example, if you want to do something within the editor, I don't know, whatever, you can just search for that. So, for example, you want to do some code folding, you don't know what is available or what you want to do. You just type in fold, and it's going to show you all the possible commands you have, including the shortcuts. So that's why I'm saying you don't need to memorize all the shortcuts. You don't even need to memorize the actions within the editor. You can just search for them. Yeah. So another way to directly go there is by pressing Control-Shift-P. So Control-Shift-P immediately brings you to this window, or you can press Control-P and then manually enter the greater sign, and you get to the same point. The nice thing with this is that it's also going to show all the possible commands that are given by some extensions. So if you install extensions, they provide you some functionality. You can also search what you can do with these extensions with this little search bar. Okay. Now, good. A few more things now. So the code I provide here is, I mean, it's very little, and it's nothing to really, I mean, to learn any coding, let's say. But what I want to show you now is how you can navigate some libraries that people already wrote. So, for example, ASE, which Ranga introduced in his seminar, you can use from the command line, but as we saw, you can also use it within Python scripts. So, if you import here now, for example, this atoms class from ASE, and you hover over it, you will get this little pop-up here showing you the documentation of the class, which might be quite useful, right? So you go on here, you just go with the mouse on it. I mean, you don't even need to click, you just hover over it, and you can scroll through it.
Doesn't work for me.
For this, you need ASE and you need the Python extension.
I don't have ASE.
Yeah, if you don't have ASE, that's a problem. But, okay, let's say we can also use... maybe... yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can try installing it. Otherwise, I mean, just follow along. These are just things. I mean, you don't necessarily need to like try out all the things live. You can also just look. I'm just showing some of these features that I think can be very useful. So, okay, if you hover over the symbol here, you get this documentation, and this works for modules. It works for functions. It works for whatever you load in. Now, what you can also do is if you press and hold Control, you will see that this atoms class here that we're importing, it becomes a clickable link. So then if you click on it, it's going to bring you directly to the source code of the module. Okay, so this is here within ASE, all the code that is written by them, whatever. With Control Tab, if we press it once, we can go back to our previous file. So let's go back. Another thing, I don't know the shortcut here, but what you can also do is this here, it's called peak definition. Instead of jumping to the original source code file, if you do this, it's going to show you the source code here in this little pop-up.
What did you do?
So I pressed Control-Shift-P to open, this is called the command palette, by the way, when you search for these operations. And then if you search for peak, you will get peak definition as one of the things you can do. And this is going to show you within the editor not just the documentation. So if you hover, it's just going to show you the doc string, but it's actually going to show you the source code. Usually I just jump directly to the object, to the source code,
Yeah.
which you can do either with Control-Click, as I mentioned, or also with F12. So then you don't need to use the mouse. So, okay.
So, we did not install the ASE extension. We just
No, it's just, you just have ASE installed and the Python extensions. So, and okay, let me just maybe unfold this here. So, okay, cool. Now you also see on the side here, on the right side, you see the mini-map. So you see, for example, here in orange, there's quite a lot of documentation, right? And overall, this file is quite large. So it's 2,000 lines of code. And this might be a little bit hard to navigate, right? But the good thing about Python, I think, is that you have a lot of these libraries available. So you can just use the functionalities from there. So now I'm going to show you some things how you can navigate through such a code base, for example. So if we press Control-P again, if you put an @ symbol here now, you will see a list of all the objects that are defined within this file. So you have here, for example, the atoms class. You have here a bunch of different functions or a bunch of variables, let's say, and also functions that are defined within this file. If you add a semicolon now, again in the search bar, you will actually have it grouped by the type. So you have here, okay, you have the atoms class, and then if you go further down, you have methods. So people who worked with Python before know. So methods are just functions defined within a class. And you see always behind the method, you see which class it was defined in. So, I mean, don't follow along, just to show you. I mean, this file only has one class defined. But if we go, for example, to this, I mean, don't follow, I just want to show you. If you go, for example, to this nep file here, this nep functionality within ASE, you have a bunch of classes defined. You have 17 classes, and you can navigate through the code. First, it's going to show you all the classes, it's going to show you some variables, some functions, etc. So, just a tip, if you need to run nep calculations, I have never used it, actually. But you know, that's what I mean. Like, if you need to run neps, you can script the stuff yourself, or do some other things, or you can check maybe ASE has something, or other tools like this. Now, okay, if we go back to the atoms class now, so where you should still be. And we open again this symbols view. What is very nice is you can now type something here and you can search for functions, classes that contain this string. So for example, you run some calculations and you want to look what you can do with the magnetizations. You just type in something related to that, how you expect maybe it's going to be named, like for example magnetization, and it's going to show you here all the functions you have. So you have get magnetic moments, set magnetic moments. This is good if you don't really know you don't really know how it's called, but you know somewhat what you're looking for. Or for example, maybe I want to get my chemical symbols. I don't know what what I'm looking for. I just type in symbols and you see here, okay, what you can do. So you have here this symbols attribute, you have this function here, get chemical symbols, and if you go up and down, you can scroll through all of these functions. So these kind of tools allow you to go through some of these Python libraries, which can be quite large. So ASE is around 180,000 lines of Python code. In that way, you can navigate them, I think, rather nicely. Okay.
I think these are even more useful for those which don't have documentation.
Yeah. So yeah, in principle, I mean, of course, you can also Google all of these things, and I'm also going to show you something how to, I think, make that a bit better, let's say. But yeah, I usually use that quite a lot. Like I go directly to the source code and I just check what is there, and you can you can navigate it quickly. One thing to mention, you could also just use a search function here, right? But then it's just going to match any text. Whereas if you use this pop-up, it's just going to search for actual functions or actual classes, so actually defined Python objects in that case, but it's the same for everything else. Just to mention this, why I think this is much better. Okay, are there any questions until here, or the things worked somewhat, and you hopefully see also how this might be useful? Now, a few more things related to editing. So let me, for example, print here, just add some code. Hello, for example. So one thing that I started using now quite a lot is if you are on some string inside the editor and you press Ctrl D, it's going to select this string. And you see already below, it highlighted all the other occurrences of that string. Now, if you press Ctrl D again, it's going to highlight all the other occurrences. So one by one, for example, you have some variable name you want to change, you can use that. Similarly, if you are on the word, again, so the same starting point, with Ctrl-Shift-L, you can just select immediately all the occurrences within the file, let's say. And okay, now you get this cursor basically here and all of these positions, and you can start editing. So you can, for example, capitalize this letter here. Again, you could do the same, in this case, you could do the same with just a normal search and replace. But just to show you quickly where this might be more useful, is, for example, now if I have this Jupyter Notebook cell here, whatever, and let's say I want to remove all of this text I added here in the end, and I want to add some other text. What I can do is I can just select, for example, these 4 characters that you will see again highlighted, the other positions where they occur. You can select all of them with Ctrl-Shift-L, and then with Shift-End, you can select in each of these lines everything until the end, and you can, for example, remove it and yeah. So especially if you have like some repetitive things, for example, this can allow you to edit your files faster. So this multi-line editing, it's called, it's also a very nice and powerful feature of Visual Studio Code, I think.
Sorry, how did you select the full line then here?
With Shift-End. So either Ctrl-D to select them one by one, or Ctrl-Shift-L to select all of them. Yeah, I mean, might be that some of the shortcuts don't work. I mean, also for me on my laptop here, some of the ones I use when I prepared everything, for example, they didn't work.
You can always just do Ctrl-P greater than, and then
Yeah.
select multiple occurrences and it will show you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's also the thing with this command palette. If something doesn't work, you can just search for it. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Now, one more thing I would like to show you here also. So, in the instructions, I mentioned some tool which is called Black. So, if you have it installed, it might not work for you out of the box, but just to show you what it can do, is if you have, for example, some kind of ugly Python code here, right? Which, I mean, I just commented out. You have some dictionary here, which, I mean, doesn't look too nice. You have some additional white spaces here. What Black does, if you have it installed, is it's going to auto-format your code every time you save the file. So if I save the file here now, it's just going to auto-format it for me. And I don't need to worry about this anymore. Which I find kind of useful because, I mean, all of these kind of tricks or shortcuts, they aim so that you can actually focus on just writing the code and writing good code and getting the most out of it. And you don't need to worry about formatting your code, for example, with this. Yeah, okay. So let me just, yeah. Another concept I would like to introduce, I haven't put it in the installation instructions, so you can just follow here on the screen, is called snippets. Maybe you have heard of this before, but you have extensions also in Visual Studio Code, the same in Vim generally. You have these functionalities that just provide code, for example, for the language that you're working in. They just provide you with some exemplary code, let's say. So if I type in here now Python class, for example, and I don't know, this might not work for you because I didn't send you this extension, but I just wanted to show it here. You see that there comes this pop-up with a bunch of code. And you see here in the brackets, it's this extension Python snippets. Now if I press enter, it's going to put all the code here automatically. And now I can modify, so I can modify the name here. I can go through all of these parts. Now, personally, I don't really use these snippets for my own code, because in the end, if you need to modify a lot of this stuff, you might be faster just writing your own code from the beginning. But I still mention it because, especially if you're new to some programming language, you might not really know the syntax. So instead of crying over syntax errors, right, you can just use these snippets. So Python has a very nice syntax, but I think most of us had the same experience with Bash, that whichever Bash command you write in the beginning, it will never work.
Except for that.
Yeah. So the same exists also for Bash. So this extension, the snippets extension, is already included in this Bash extension pack. So for example, if I put here now for, so a for loop, right? It's a very common concept you will have it in literally any programming language. You get a bunch of snippets here. So yeah, this you guys can probably also try out now. So I have here, for example, this for I. It's the extension called shellman, and you see here which code it's going to insert. So this is like some for loop in Bash, just going over some numbers. You have the same for ij. Or for example here, if I just press enter, I'm just going to get this for loop. And the value here is that you can use these kind of code snippets to just figure out how the syntax needs to be. Yeah. Okay. Good. One more thing, maybe you have already seen it here. If I now remove some of this code here, for example, or let's maybe put the semicolon back again, you see inside the line, you already see some error messages. and this might work for you or it might not work for you in the current setup. This is done by the error lens extension, which is also one of the extensions I sent in the instructions. So it's actually showing you within your code where there's errors and even gives you like hints to what you might be doing wrong, which also might make it easier to do the coding in the end.
And it's working in real time, right?
Yeah, exactly. So while you're typing, so for example, let's maybe go back to Python because that's nicer. If I accidentally close this closing bracket here of the print statement, it's going to show you what is the error. So, yeah. And this is okay. Actually, it is enabled. I thought I disabled it, but yeah, it's this extension here, error lens. So in installing any of these extensions, you will have the list that I sent you, and installing them is pretty easy in Visual Studio Code. Okay, cool. If you just follow here, you will see what is possible in principle. Now, if you click on source control, you just have, by default, you just have these changes here. If you click on any of the files here, it's going to open this side-by-side view showing you what the differences are between the files, which already I think is much nicer than using Git on the command line. But one of the extensions here, which I also recommend you, it's called Git Lens. So if we enable this one here, and we go back to our file, what you will see now behind the lines in gray is you will at each line see who made the change, when, and in which commit. So you can just go through the file and you will always just get this information displayed. You see behind the line here in gray, maybe it's a little bit smaller. So yesterday I committed to the Git repository. I added this line of code with the commit message outline should be done. If you hover over this information, you will even get another pop-up showing you even more information. So you can do, I mean, I don't even know what you can do, but in principle you can do whatever you can imagine with Git, with this extension, within Visual Studio Code.
Question.
Yeah.
This thing also works for LaTeX?
Yeah, works for LaTeX, works for C, Fortran, everything.
LaTeX also?
Yeah. You can compile your LaTeX projects. Yeah, and you also have like this auto code formatting. I mean, that's a nice thing about this. Just installing extensions for another language, you will get exactly the same features.
So even LaTeX will work.
LaTeX does work. Yeah. I mean, I have here, if you check, it's disabled right now because, of course, if you enable 1 million extensions, you have LaTeX extension pack, for example. So
Okay, they tell you whether the code is correct.
exactly. So you have like error checking, you have syntax highlighting, all these different things. That's a nice thing. Whichever language you need to work on, just look for the extension for that language and it's going to work. I mean, maybe it's not going to work exactly the same way like for Python, but all of these main functionalities you will have. So I basically edit any file I'm doing in Visual Studio Code now, if it's a bash script or if it's a Python or whatever. Yeah, so now also one more thing just to conclude Git. If you have Git Lens installed, this extension, instead of just having the changes here, you will have much more information here in the bottom. So you can go through the commits, you can go through the branches, you can go through the remote repositories. So whatever you need to do in Git, you can do here, which is quite nice because if you look at the highest rated Stack Overflow questions of all times, you will see that half of them are related to Git. So if you get confused or you make a mess, don't worry, it's not your fault. You know, you're not alone. So, but yeah, for example, I mean here now, okay, I have the changes. I mean by just going here, I can say, okay, I want to discard them, I want to add them to be committed. You can commit, you can push. I mean, whichever Git functionalities you want to do, you can do here.
Yeah, I mean, we don't use Git a lot, but especially if two people are working on the code.
Yeah, I mean,
That is very important.
for multiple people, I would recommend Git for sure. Also, even if it's just yourself, I mean, just set up a Git repository,
Yeah, if you are making
commit your
a-
code, because maybe you might break it,
Yeah.
something might not work anymore, and then you can always go back. Another extension, which is quite nice, just to show you quickly, is this one here. So if I search for this extension, actually I will get it here. It's called Git file history. And then you even get this visual inspection of your file. You can go through the different commits, which I find pretty dope. Okay, so yeah, so in principle, I mean, if you have any problem or you think about anything that could improve your workflow, probably somebody wrote an extension to do it, which I think is very powerful. A few more things I would like to show you. So, okay, this doesn't work right now, but now you're writing, for example, the bash script here. So you don't want to necessarily switch between your editor and your shell all the time, right? So you can directly run the shell script. There's a command. So it's going to open the bottom panel here.
Yeah.
Well, I should maybe... yeah, I should need to give the permissions to the file. I mean, then you will see my password, so I'm not going to do that now, right now. But I mean, it's gonna just run the current bash script that you're working on. A few more features. So, now this actually works. Okay. So let's remove that bottom panel here. You can also work with Jupyter notebooks within Visual Studio Code. So I prefer that over working with them in the browser, because all these functionalities that I mentioned before, they work the same way here. And another nice thing that you have is, for example, by default you have this timing here of your code cells. Or if we go one more cell down, in the bottom here, as I mentioned in the beginning, you have this Jupyter tab, which, for example, shows you all your variables you have defined in your Jupyter notebook. And you can open them. For example, you can open your NumPy arrays or your pandas data frames. And for example, just sort them by the column. So I don't know if that's easily possible within Excel, but in principle, you can just explore your data if you do like machine learning and you have like some arrays or some data frames. This is very useful just to explore your data, for example. Yeah, another thing here regarding Jupyter notebooks is that you see here I have this first heading, second heading. These are markdown cells. So maybe some of you know what markdown is. What is nice is if you include this in your Jupyter notebook, it's going to give your notebook a structure, which you will see here on the Explorer. You will see the outline of your Jupyter notebook if you add these headings here. So if you have, for example, you have a big notebook with some notes, with different sections that you want to share with somebody, I recommend adding some markdown cells just to keep everything organized and keep the things separated. And you can quickly navigate through your code here. So you can just click on these points and you're going to jump immediately to the code. Yeah, okay. So in principle, these are most of the things I wanted to share with you. one last thing that might be helpful, especially again if you're not too experienced of a coder. Let's see. Yeah, okay, we have it activated. Another extension that I mentioned is called Search with Cursor, which allows you to just select some code here and use a shortcut to immediately, well, if the internet is going to work here, to immediately look for that code. So if you're working with some new library, for example, let's say I use ASE and I don't know if ASE maybe can work with VASP, I just type it and I search that, and it's going to open it immediately in the browser and search for it.
How do you open this?
The shortcut is Shift-Alt-S.
The name of the extension?
Search with Cursor. Yeah, should. Okay. Are there any questions or any things that somebody would like to talk about or mention or?